and I will share my screen as well. Okay. Can you see that okay? Yeah, brilliant. I think that I don't need to repeat why it is important to support health workers on strike. I mean, we've got an NHS in crisis, underfunding for the last 10 years. We've got a huge number of vacancies in the NHS. NHS workers have been, at the heart of the COVID crisis and have been working all the way through saving lives. And, if we fight for climate justice, we also want social justice for all. The climate crisis is a health crisis. We know the health impact that extreme weather events can have, floods and fires, heat wave, cold waves. They all impact our health. People have mentioned pollution before. There are so many links between the climate crisis and the health crisis. But also those workers are fighting corporate profiteering with the privatization of the NHS. They're fighting big finances, and those are the same forces that are, weakening our public health while also financing the climate catastrophe. So there is so much we can do to link the different struggle and work together. Sorry, I'm trying to move on, but it doesn't work. There we go. So many of you have already been on picket line, but this is a training for people who may not have been on a picket line before as well. So I mean, what is a picket line? It's usually outside the workplace, and workers are organizing a picket to encourage colleagues not to go in and to join the strike. In the past, it was probably more forceful than it is now, but generally you will see that workers will try to engage with people walking in. But it's not just other colleagues that you may want to engage on the picket line. It's also helping to publicize disputes with service users or customers, whoever is actually going into your workplace, if they are. And certainly in hospital, that may be like a tricky one because people who wanted to use the hospital may not be really sympathetic with the strike necessary. It also helped to reach out to the wider public with the messages. And often the general media doesn't really sort of give voices to workers on strike. So it's also collective action. So if you just stay at home when you're on strike and you don't see other workers, you can be like, lose the motivation to continue the action if you don't get results. So this collective action, being together, will help keep the dispute going. And strikers will welcome solidarity from anybody going along. So don't worry, people are generally very friendly, and many of you already know that. So before you go onto the picket line, a tip is do a little bit of research so you can be confident about, who is on strike, when, which unions are on strike. And we're going to see it's not necessarily straightforward, especially with the NHS dispute. We've got different unions involved. Royal College of Nursing, we've got the GMB Union, we've got United Union, we've got Unison. So, what type of workers do they represent? The RCN, Royal College of Nurses, is obviously the nurses, but GMB, Unite, and Unison can represent different type of workers, where they're paramedic, or they may be porters, they may be hospital cleaners, or they may be working in the offices. So if you're not sure, it's always useful to check the union website. Usually you get some information. It can be different sectors, and you can click on the right tab to find, out a bit more what type of workers they represent. The website usually have news, and obviously you got linked to their social media, which often give really good information about the different disputes taking place. Be aware that Scotland and Northern Ireland often operates differently, and this current strike is actually not going in Scotland. In Scotland, there's been like a different pay offer, and some unions are still balloting to see if they are accepting the offers. I think that's the case of the RCN, but also some unions have recommended their member accept the offer. I think that's Unison, and they just voted to accept, if I remember well, a 7.5% pay rise, which is still a pay cut. So where are we now with the current strike? So we've got the Royal College of Nursing, which is going to strike 2 days in December so far, the 15th and the 20th. They are representing up to 100,000 nurses, and they will walk out, not everywhere, but across 65 NHS organizations on those 2 dates, and for 12 hours at a time. Then you've got the GMB. They represent more than 10,000 ambulance workers, such as paramedic, emergency care assistant, call handlers, and that's across 9 trusts in England. They will be going out on strike on the 21st and the 28th of December. Unite have got a smaller number of members in the ambulance services, 1,600, and that's in the West Midlands, Northwest, and the Northeast ambulance service trusts. And they're only going to go out on the 21st of December at this stage. Unison also represents ambulance crews for 5 services in England. That's London, Yorkshire, Northwest, Northeast, and Southwest. They will be out on the 21st, but also Unison represents a wider range of workers, including nurses. Quite often, nurses can be in the RCN and Unison, but they also represent porters, healthcare assistants, cleaners, and other NHS workers. And those will be on strike at 2 Liverpool hospitals. That's the Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital and Liverpool University Hospital. Just note that when it comes to the ambulance worker, what they've said is that they will respond to Category 1 calls. That's the last threatening incident. So it's just useful to note that, that's what the union have decided to do. But quite a complicated landscape. People are not striking all everywhere in all NHS trusts, in all locations, and that can be a little bit of a nightmare to understand what's going on. We do expect further strike dates in the new year as well. But all of that will be depending of, the talks, if negotiations are restarting. And note that if negotiation restarted, some of the strike may be called off and cancelled last minute or rescheduled. Before you go to picket line, do your research. Where are the pickets you are going to visit? You don't want to be turning out at an hospital and there is no dispute there. So you need to know where they are located. As I said, not all trust and hospital will participate at once, and some of them will not participate at all because they may not have reached the right percentage of workers voting. And sometimes it's also useful to try to find out, what time are workers getting there and leaving. Generally, a picket line start quite early. From the information I've got, it looks like the NHS track are mainly going to start around or the picket line maybe around 8 a.m. Generally, if you turn up between 8 and 10, you should catch the picket line, but be aware that workers may not be there all day. People have also mentioned that there will be rallies taking place in towns. So, workers will go to the picket line in the morning and then later on, meet in a central point with their supporters. On the webpage that I shared in the chat, you can use our strike map to locate where the strikes are taking place. And just note that this map is actually powered by Strike Map UK. That includes all strikes happening across the country if they've been registered by the unions. I mean, some of you have been to many picket line and you could probably teach us some tips, but when you arrive to the picket line, the main thing is to start from a position of solid support for the strike, and then you will be welcome. So you could introduce yourself, let the picket leader or the official picket or somebody you identified as being on strike, let them know, which group you're from and that you're bringing solidarity. Explain why you're here and explain why you want to support them. So don't hesitate to approach them, have a chat, let them know you're here. Also ask what you can do, what you can do to help. They may ask you to help out with some leafleting or other activities they're doing or to hold the banner, but just be respectful of the picket line. So if you want to bring your own group's flags or banners, make sure that you ask first. So It is getting cold, so it can be a good idea to show up with some solidarity and biscuits, or it could be coffee or something else. But to keep the striking workers warm, look after them, that's always like a welcome contribution. If there's a lot of people on the picket line and it is very crowded, workers may be worried about intimidating patients. So you might need to move to another spot, away from the pickets. But you can make that assessments once you're there. If you're not sure, just make sure you ask one of the strikers. If you bring a banner, best to actually create your own banner. Saying you support the strike. That will always be welcome. And obviously, this is a don't block access to the hospital to patients, and also don't intervene about talking to workers that strikers may be persuading to not go in. That's not your job to do so. So bear that in mind. Right. Once we're on the picket line, we introduce ourselves, we ask how the strike is going, we having like a little chat with some of the strikers. How do we actually start bringing up the climate crisis? Well, first of all, don't bring it too early. First, discuss the strike and the issue why workers are here. That's why they're here. That's what they want to hear. Also, don't be defensive. Not everybody is a climate activist. Don't be on the attack, or if you disagree with certain things that people are talking about, don't necessarily try to rebut everything. Just focus on being open and listening people's views. Also, never get into a heated argument, and try to de-escalate if you feel that there is some hostility. I mean, we had some activists going on picket line, climate activists, and picking a fight about fridges or veggie food. Definitely to avoid. If it goes into that direction, try to start a conversation on a different topic. Don't take the bite. If there is a group of people, you can just join in and wait and listen and see how the discussion develop. People are generally welcoming you into a group, and you can then take part into the conversation. One simple thing to start with is, maybe something like, as well as the rise of prices or the cost of energy, I'm also worried about climate change. How do you feel about it? And, that's an open question. And then you can gauge about, is the person actually really care about climate? Does they want to have a conversation? Is it something that they don't really know about? You will really quickly be able to, assess where they are at. Asking people what they think is often the best way of starting this conversation. Other tip to bring up the climate crisis. I mean, obviously, the NHS workers are on strike because of low pay, the cost of living crisis. So there is quite an easy link to bring up climate justice, is to link the cost of living crisis and energy prices. So you can point out that energy companies, fossil fuel companies, and the bosses and corporations are all in it for profit, not for workers or the planet. That could be a good conversation starter. You could also point out the cold weather and the worries that people cannot heat their home. And you can make the link with the health impact of extreme cold or heat from the last summer, because that was also an issue. Once you're into this conversation, you could talk about we could insulate homes, which will also save cost of energy bill, but also be beneficial for the planet. You may want to mention extreme weather events such as floods in Pakistan, or we had them in the UK with big storm Dennis in 2020. People forgot because we had COVID, but that was actually all over the news. Or there were some fires in Manchester Moors and in London this summer. So if you mention those extreme weather events, you could ask what impact they think this have on people working in the house, because quite often those frontline workers, they actually have got to deal with that when people are cold and fall ill, where people are ill with heat strokes, they will come to hospital. So the likeliness is that those health workers have actually had to deal with such things. It was quite interesting when I met with some of the New York nurses at some event a few years ago, and they were speaking at this climate justice event, and they were explaining how they came to become really active on campaigning for climate justice. The starting point was Hurricane Sandy. I think it's like 10 years ago now in New York, where obviously, neighborhood was devastated. Many people died, but also many people were very ill and affected by that event. So they were on the front line of having to deal with this climate and health devastation. And further down the line, they became also active campaigning against fracking, because something like fracking, as we know, have got potential health effects on people living in those neighborhoods, as well as having detrimental effects for the climate. If the conversation goes well, and this was just like a few ideas on how to start, and as I say, you can like assess where the person you're talking to is at. But if the conversation go well, you could also ask them if they heard about MedAct and the Health for Green New Deal. I will share in a moment a link to the MedAct website and their Health for Green New Deal. It's got lots of information there, group of health workers who campaign for climate justice. So it's like maybe a useful read before you go to the Picket lines if you get a chance. So this is a few pointers and hopefully a bit of a conversation starters. And I hope that you have find that useful as a starting point. I think I'm now going to pause the recording or just stop the recording so we can